complicated issue of euthanasia is certainly back on the agenda, and with Parliament set to return next week, legislation, I'm told, is due to be debated in the Senate that will, if successful, hand back to the territories their right to permit the practice of euthanasia within their own jurisdiction. That's putting it very simply. Now, of course, some of you will remember when the Northern Territory tried this on years ago, the Howard government, I think it was at the time, overruled, and so for Australians wanting to end their suffering via euthanasia, ever since they've had to travel abroad, often to Switzerland or Holland, and of course that comes at great expense, and often because of that expense, those people that are to be euthanased are not surrounded by loved ones in their final moments. Well, Senator David Leyonhjelm might well be the man that delivers this into law. Now, he is the one that has been front and centre ever since he got into the Senate, really, pushing for euthanasia laws to be changed in Australia, particularly so the territories, like the Northern Territory and the ACT, will have the legal right to allow euthanasia in their jurisdictions without Commonwealth interference. As I say, it could all come to a head next week. Senator Leyonhjelm joins me on the line. David, nice to talk.
Good morning.
That's basically it, isn't it? You want the territories to have the right to allow euthanasia within their jurisdiction and not have the Commonwealth overrule them like they did years ago.
Yes, that's right. The Liberal Democrats have always been very much in favour of assisted suicide, subject to precautions, of course, to ensure that it is genuinely voluntary and full consent. But the Commonwealth government, the Commonwealth Parliament, doesn't have jurisdiction over assisted suicide, and I'm in the federal Parliament, in the Senate. So the maximum I can do on this issue is to remove this constraint, as you mentioned in your introduction, that was introduced under the Howard government back in 1997, which prevented the territories from legislating on assisted suicide. It doesn't make a lot of sense. The states, of course, have full rights to legislate on assisted suicide, and they've been debating it. Several states debated it this year, and of course Victoria did introduce assisted suicide under very, very restricted conditions. But the ACT and the Northern Territory are blocked from having that debate, despite the fact that they also have elected parliaments. So it's even if you don't think the territories should legislate for assisted suicide, I think there's a very good argument to be made that they should at least be treated in the same fashion as the states, with their parliaments allowed to decide that.
Well, indeed, otherwise why bother giving them their own parliaments?
Yes, that's exactly right. It's pretty undemocratic. I remember in 1997 when this bill to block them was introduced, thinking how undemocratic it was, irrespective of what you thought about euthanasia or assisted suicide.
Now, look, I mean, I'll know my colours to the mast here, David. I'm on the fence on this, as I've said continually. I've got splinters in my bum on this issue because, on the one hand, I probably wouldn't choose it for myself, and I don't think many in my family would ever consider it. Religious beliefs come into play. But on the other hand, having seen people suffer tremendously in hospitals at the end of their life and being kept alive with tubes and who knows what else, I can also understand some people saying, well, you know what, I don't want that end for myself, and if I've got my full wits about me and I decide that, let's say I'm 90 and I'm going to a natural end here, but with great pain and suffering, I just want to expedite that with family and friends around in a comfortable environment at a time of my own choosing. I don't know if I should be the person to say to them, no, you can't do it. Yeah. I suppose that's where this debate lies, doesn't it, even in the Parliament? Yes,
that's exactly right. You've exactly identified the issue. We all have our own views on whether we might take advantage of this and whether we would want our friends and family and so our loved ones to make the same decision as us. But ultimately, we should each be in charge of our own bodies. I mean, if we don't have the right to end our own lives at a time of our choosing, then, we really don't own our own bodies.
Well, and let's just be frank and blunt here as well, David. The fact of the matter is, the tragedy is, a number of people do take their own life because it all gets too much with pain and suffering and whatnot through medical conditions. In essence, they are taking it upon themselves to expedite the end of their life. And what a euthanasia bill would do would be to, in a legislative sense, allow a medical intervention so that the individual trauma doesn't have to be undertaken.
Yeah, it doesn't actually have to even be medical. The point I make, I'm a bit leery of open slather on voluntary euthanasia myself, even though I am very strongly in favour of it in principle. We do not want a situation where Granny is being pressured to allow herself to be bumped off so that the kids or somebody else can inherit the house. You know,
that's the concern.
There's no question whatsoever that we want to avoid that situation. So the way I characterise it is this. If Granny wants to end her life, and if she was quite capable of ending her life physically and was well aware of what she was doing, then everybody would say, look, you know, that's her choice. It might be sad. It might be something we would like to talk her out of, but ultimately it's her choice. Now, you know, everybody would agree so far so good. Now, the only bit there that I would add to that is, okay, what if Granny is of that mind? She is quite clear that she wants to end her life. It's no longer worth living, but she's too sick or too feeble to actually do it herself. My view is that's legitimate, that it's legitimate that we legislate to make it legal for somebody to provide someone assistance to die under those circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Can we ever legislate enough parameters, though, such that we're only here dealing with people perhaps with a terminal illness or people over a certain age, and it doesn't start to get out of control?
Well, a very good question, and of course a lot of people worry about that, and they say, no, we can't ever have enough precautions to ensure that it's not being used maliciously. I think always got to bear in mind that it has to be consent, and it has to be in the full knowledge of what you're doing. So if you've got dementia, you don't know what you're doing. You can't give consent. If you have any other mental disease that interferes with your ability to understand, be coherent, express your views, understand what the implications of your decision are, you can't say that that's consent. It has to be clear-headed, coherent decision to do it. Now, there's various ways of verifying that. You obviously need somebody who's independent outside the family and so forth who can do that, and there are various ideas on how to achieve that. Some people say doctors, but I'm not convinced that you need to be a doctor to verify that somebody is quite clear about their view.
And I suppose none of this is in any way to criticise the work of palliative care and whatever. I mean, they do tremendous work, of course, tangential to this.
Yep.
Now, that's
palliative care is very important.
Absolutely.